clients are overwhelmingly poor, rural people. They're so religious. They all go to church. They all believe in God. And of course, for me, as a Marxist, religion, opiate of the masses, I'm trying to foster a revolution. I go through this experience, I go to church, and there are my clients, and they're the same people I always knew. And I see for the first time what religion means. It literally makes your life worth living, notwithstanding the poverty and the hardship. It's about loving and sharing and living a full life. Having God and faith is fundamental. So there's a bit of a mea culpa there. I've always had this slightly condescending attitude towards it, of which I am ashamed, that I thought so ill of their faith.
Well, welcome to this Elitia dialogue with my friend Richard Spoor. For the past 18 years, I have had the enormous privilege of a ringside seat to watch legal history unfold in the work of Richard and his growing team of human rights attorneys in respect of South Africa's mining law and practice. When I first met him in 2006, he sat alone in a small office in White River, with the full burden of mining-related injustices weighing heavily on his shoulders. Today, thanks to huge successes in his public interest litigation, he has been able to move upstairs to a much larger office and has a couple of other young attorneys working with him. This office in White River is just a satellite office. His son Alex runs the head office in Johannesburg with another dozen or so people there. Now, if you want to know what happened between then and now, I have, over the past 5 years, been compiling a playlist on my YouTube channel titled, appropriately, Tracking Spoor. And you can check the link that now appears above. It mainly features a selection of interviews with Richard in which he reflects on what he has done to try and change the way the mining industry does business in South Africa. But when this conversation gets added to the playlist, it'll be nothing like the rest, because we're going to talk about Richard's own personal faith journey. He has agreed to share his personal story of what's been happening to him over the past couple of years as a 60-something man who has, over a long career of helping vulnerable people deal with their own crises, has gone through a huge big upset in the steady state of the way things were of his own. 18 months ago, Richard was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He went for surgery at a hospital in Pretoria, and as soon as he was discharged, I leapt in the Gautrain to go and see him and his wife, Georgie. And the story they told me of how they were coping with his ordeal was amazing, but it left me having to recalibrate my thinking. I just listened and prayed, not sure where it would go, and well, in the past 18 months, the story has now ripened. And nothing needs to be heard, because joy needs to be shared. And I'm calling it Forgiven-ness, Richard Spoor's personal journey and faith. However, because Richard and I are such close friends and know each other so well, I thought it best to ask someone else to participate in the process, so I decided to invite a new friend, Elizabeth Oldfield, to come alongside us to help us do that. Well, Elizabeth happens to host her own podcast, which is titled The Sacred, and she writes beautiful insights in the spiritual life in her Substack platform titled Fully Alive. I first came across Elizabeth when she chaired a delightful session in something called the Realization Festival in mid-2022, organized by a very nice bunch of people who call themselves Perspectiva, and I put a link up to that conversation she had, because it was well worth watching, because it happens to be with a person who is another close friend and mentor of mine, Alistair McIntosh, a Scottish Quaker, a writer and peace activist. And now here's the remarkable thing. Alongside Richard, Alistair has been the other big influence in my life. Alistair has helped me tend my own soul, while Richard has piloted me through and into the turbulence in our shared work over the past 18 years of supporting the Amadiba community on the Wild Coast to put a stop to a plan to mine the ancestral lands for titanium. Now, it was Alistair's book, Soil and Soul, People versus Corporate Power, that inspired and nerved me in naming, unmasking, and engaging the powers. He talks about that in his conversation with Elizabeth. The similarities between the story that Alistair tells in his book compared to the story of the Amadiba community in the Pondoland wild coast of South Africa are remarkable. I talk about that in another video dialogue at this link with the author of an amazing book, At Work in the Runes, Dougald Hine. So watch that one too. In fact, it so happens that Elizabeth and Alistair also know him. So it seems like we're all part of the same spiritual ecosystem that's supporting all of us in this new thrust towards a deeper consciousness about life and the human species on the planet Earth. Elizabeth, before Richard tells his story, just ask you to check in and tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's really lovely to be here. I live in South London, in the UK, in a very, sometimes we call it a micro monastery, a very small intentional community with two families living together and turn the garage into a chapel. We're trying to have sort of monastic inspired rhythms of prayer and hospitality. And during the daytimes, I host a podcast called The Sacred, where I talk to people about what is sacred to them in the broader sense, what are the deep principles and values that are driving them. And that's people from all different political persuasions, metaphysical perspectives, all different tribes, professions, really trying to build empathy and curiosity for what's going on underneath the surface of the people that shape our common life, trying to get to the people behind the positions. And that's a sort of peace building practice of mine. I'm very inspired by the Christian nonviolent tradition, but just holding spaces where we can seek to understand each other as fragile, complex people, as well as people we might represent positions we disagree with, is a big part of what I am interested in. Mm-hmm. And I coach people, I write a Substack newsletter, and I have a book coming out this May 2024 called Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. I have two children who are currently getting ready for school just outside my door.
And I just can't wait to read your book. So thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, I mean, Richard, tell us a bit about now, why is this man that I've known for so long, 18 years, just suddenly kind of not arguing with me about some things?
I don't think my story is a unique or particularly interesting story, but it is, for me, certainly, it's very, very profound thing that's happened. Things have changed for me very dramatic ways. I suppose the background is important. I'm 64 years old now, turning 65, born in South Africa to Dutch parents who came here post-war with the German occupation and the Holocaust and things like that fresh in the background. Jewish families as home friends and Dutch people and the war history kind of gave me a very strong kind of liberal inclination, a non-racial, democratic, anti-fascist kind of attitude. It was an atheist, not a militant atheist, just not a non-religious home. There was no religion, no church. I have never been to church in my life, never. Not for my wedding, not for a service. I have never, ever been to a church. At university, I was converted to revolutionary Marxism, of the Trotskyist variety. One of the differences between Trotskyists and those we refer to as Stalinists, the conventional communists, the South African Communist Party, the Soviet Communist Party, was we as Trotskyists, we believed in our agency to make the revolution. Lenin was our model through a strategic intervention in 1916, 1917. He turned the whole thing over. He intervened in a crisis in history and he turned things. So we are very involved in kind of trying to foment a socialist revolution in South Africa. Looking for strategic interventions. And I mention this only because of this question of agency which comes up, and how you reconcile that with a kind of sense I have now is that it's God's will unfolding. And how do I reconcile God's will unfolding and being at peace with this notion of having a responsibility to do things and change things? So where does agency fit into that, and how can you be at peace and content to see things unfold and accept it, and yet be an agent for change? This is the only reason I mention this, but I moderated over time. I was, in the anti-apartheid struggle. Post-94, I became an established kind of human rights lawyer. A lot of my friends and colleagues went into government because of the democratic changes here. I decided to stay in opposition. And I've got a long history as a human rights public interest lawyer, mainly promoting the rights of workers, mine workers in particular, struggles around their health, struggles around black lung, a disease condition that we're dealing with now, asbestosis. I've worked with English lawyers on it, American lawyers on it, silicosis in the gold mines, and then a lot of work around land and communities and mines, and the struggles of communities, and the impact of development on communities, and trying to balance those things. Throughout this period, although my left-wing militancy perhaps disappeared, there remained this very, very strong materialist kind of understanding of the world. I'm interested in science. I'm interested in space and cosmology, but to me, it's always been a very, very mechanical kind of thing. Another thing that kind of occurred later in my life, like most people, I have habits. I was smoking cigarettes, certain behaviors of mine, drinking too much, behaviors that I wasn't happy with, ways of living that I wasn't happiness, and kind of wrestling with change and coming to the conclusion that change is impossible. I can't change. It's impossible to change yourself. You can't do it. And I felt a bit trapped in this kind of thing. Suddenly, very late in life, stricken by a depression, out of the blue. Never been depressed in my life, but bang. Didn't know what hit me, didn't understand it. I've always regarded myself as somebody with a very stable mindset, logical, rational, reasonable. So that didn't trouble me. Then diagnosed with prostate cancer. I wasn't even too worried about that, but I guess it has an impact. Spoke to my wife. Netflix saw a program, How to Change Your Mind, dealing with psychedelic drugs. And I took this stuff. Spoke to my wife and said, well, I have a friend who's done this. I think I'm going to try it. I'm going in for surgery soon. Let me give it a try. Went to the mountains with this friend, quite careful, quite structured, quite supervised experience. And took psilocybin. Well, it was the most traumatic event of my life. I mean, it was trauma. I thought I would never return. I thought I was so relieved when this was over. I didn't believe it would be over. I thought I was trapped there for eternity. It was terrible. Terrible in a sense of deeply traumatic. But it changed something fundamentally. This is now well over a year, it's 18 months since then. But what it did is it shattered the certainty I had about the world. It shattered that confidence that this is it and everything I see is real and this is all there is and I'm born and I live and I die and it doesn't matter and it's all just a mechanical, with retrospect, a kind of a mechanical hellscape of just devoid of kind of meaning. So, but that didn't happen in any kind of special context. Then I went to, again, to indulge my wife, went to her church and we went through one of these educational courses. It was called the Alpha course or something. I think it's very popular. Sitting there listening in small groups and for the first time listening and trying to understand the Bible. I had kind of a rough idea what it's about, but no real, all just myth and fairy stories and bullshit, superstition, rubbish. And sitting there and listening and trying to understand a little thing. And I suppose a critical event was there was a session on forgiveness. Forgiveness. What is forgiveness? And it suddenly dawned on me that forgiveness is when you are forgiven for everything you are, all your flaws, all your failings. You're forgiven. It entitles you to feel at peace with yourself. You're entitled to you're fine just the way you are, and you can accept that. With all the other stuff in my life, one of the things I've suffered from terribly is the social anxiety. And with that kind of sense of forgiveness, that falls away. With forgiveness, you can look at other people differently. You can forgive them. I mean, one of the interesting things to me is how I still see a lot of people who are very proud about, oh, I forgave this person, I forgave that person for their horrible sins or whatever. That seems to me to be nonsense. If you are forgiven, forgiving other people is the easiest thing in the world. You can just see them. Now, with that realization and that insight and that sense of forgiveness that I got, everything changed. I saw people in profoundly different way. They looked different. Their faces, as I see them today, are not the way I saw them. They look completely different. Now, how is that possible, that you can go through life, see people in a particular way, and suddenly they look completely different? I mean, kind of articulating it through conversation is kind of recognizing the divine in other people, seeing the divine in other people. And it's like they are not the same. I don't see the same things that I saw. It's profoundly different. So the forgiveness was the one thing. The other was kind of learning a little bit about prayer. Now, if you're a materialist, the kind of materialist I was, there's not even time for mindfulness or meditation or thinking or contemplating or just experiencing being alive, sitting back and feeling and taking it in. None of that. Never did any of that. Just totally no. Suddenly, prayer, an opportunity to sit still, to be grateful for what you have, to think of others, to wish well for others, to ask for peace and forgiveness, and to ask for that to be extended to other people. And just taking that time, for me, a really, really significant change. If you've never done that, it's transforming. It changes so much. I mean, my God, why haven't I done this before? And then there's another component to it all. So first of all, I have this, I'm at peace with myself. I see others people differently. I recognize their divinity. I have everything, all the blessings that come with contemplation and reflection and prayer and quiet and solitude and thinking and mainly being grateful. And then I go to church. All of these people standing around singing. My son comes to church with me. He went to a choir school. He's very keen on singing. I stand there looking awkward. He said, "Dad, sing." Oh well, let's give it a shot. I can't sing. I have a terrible voice. I have no talent for music or singing or art or culture or refinement at all. I start singing, and I'm singing. It is. I think the right term is an evangelical church. A lot of praise singing. We praise God for the best part of an hour when we start. And I'm looking around this church, and it's a lovely mixed congregation. Diverse is the language you like, but I look around and I see the joy, and I see the happiness, and I see the love, and I'm completely overwhelmed. I've never seen this in my life. I have never, ever seen this kind of love and happiness. Never. We have a little fellowship group. We sit around, 10, 12 of us, once a week. We pray a bit, we talk, we are concerned about each other. Man, the love that there is in that fellowship group is overwhelming. My idea before this experience and this change, I like dinner parties with my friends where we would have loud arguments over politics. We would shout, we would be abusive, we would be horrible to each other, and in some senses a measure of your friendship and the depth of your friendship is measured by how much abuse the other one will endure. So these are abusive conversations, and I used to think those kinds of abusive conversations are fun. They're the highlight of my social calendar. I used to see my wife and the other women and other people walk out, people get angry, and I couldn't understand why they weren't enjoying this as much as I was. And then from that to this kind of fellowship group where there's this love and concern. You know, the only thing that surprised me is when the church services finish, or communion services, why people aren't just hugging and kissing each other. It kind of warns off. But it's just extraordinary kind of change for me. I mean, yeah, you know, your day job is your day job, and the joy kind of wears off, and you've got to rediscover it, and you've got to go through it. But it's a remarkable change for the better, and kind of, you know, from there, talking to John, talking to others, you know, you start thinking about other things, about your life. And the theme that I was very interested in is the one I've spoken about earlier, about agency. You know, one of the points of prayer, I think, is to be reconciled with how things are. You know, you're calling for change, you want God to intervene, you want his plan to unfold, but at the same time, how do you act as a positive agent for change? You know, what do I do? Legal battles, civic battles, conflict, tension. How do you do that? Because I still want to change the world. I just don't believe. I'd like to see a better world. I'd like to contribute towards bringing around that better world. But quite how you do that, how you reconcile your determination to do something versus this is quite difficult and interesting for me. And I'm working on that.
Richard, thank you so much for sharing that beautiful story. It really, there's so much I want to kind of dig into, but I'll just pick up that conversational offer, because I think it's a fascinating one, and the longer I'm a Christian, the more I realize how many paradoxes like that there are. How many, the word tensions makes it sound more stressful than I mean it to be. How much actually how many instances there are where there's two seemingly irreconcilable things that are both true, and we balance in that.
Yes.
And the humility of surrendering to that, of not being able to make it make sense like a maths puzzle. But I do think that when I'm healthy around this, I think there's two equal and opposite temptations, really. One is just complete fatalism, and just, you know, it's all up to God. It's nothing to do with me. You know, the world will be what it is. You know, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's the, like, deep fatalism in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a very weird, sort of almost existentialist / nihilist book in the Bible. It's fascinating, although I think it's ironic, apparently. And then you have the like, I will bring in the kingdom of God. I see the injustice and the way this world is so not what God intended, and I will pour out my blood, sweat, and tears in order to fix it. And it feels to me that there's the way that I have learned to think about it is trying to surrender my desire to be successful in whatever I'm doing, and just seeking to be faithful. That the outcome is not up to me, but how I walk in this world, how I, seek justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God, how I see the face of Christ in the poor and the hungry and those in prison. The sheep and the goats parable is so challenging. Anyone who gives a cup of water to the thirsty is giving it to Jesus himself. The call to live justly and to care for the marginalized and connect with the vulnerable and be present with the hurting is undeniable, but it's according to be in relationship, because we're all vulnerable and we're all marginalized and we're all hurting, we're all poor, right? It's not I, from my position of power, I'm going to fix injustice. It's how do I be alongside these children of God with an open heart and do what I can, do my best, offer my little loaves and fishes, be like, here, this is all I got. I haven't got very much, and trust that God will multiply them and God will do what he's going to do. But it's sort of not, I don't need to worry about that bit. That's the bit that when I can, I find great relief in. I'm like, I'm so tiny, I have a small part to play, I'm doing my best. But none of this is really about me.
Yeah, it's this kind of, I like that idea of surrender. I mean, doing what you can, but not having expectations of it, just not assuming that you're wanting to change things and you're playing out your role without imagining that you're rejigging the whole thing. Just a kind of some personal modesty about your achievements and your contribution, and importantly, this is also a theme to me. I'm fairly recognized as a lawyer, and people always think you're doing great things, and they praise you for it. In truth, my contribution and the contribution of the next person and the next person is no different. There's no bigger contribution or lesser contribution. To me, we just do what we do, and we try and do it as well as we can. But there's nobody who does more than the other. Just live it out and be yourself, and then you're contributing to make things change.
Yeah, I think there is a radical egalitarianism that really helps, because the New Testament talks about the gifts of the Spirit being prophecy, being teaching, also being administration. We are all members of one body, and the head can't say to the foot, I don't need you. Probably all three of us have sort of tendency towards being ambitious, wanting a public role, being kind of quite extroverted and outspoken. It's a really important, I think, process of humility, that discerning what is our vocation. And I do believe that, it talks about God has got work that's prepared in advance for you to do, that there are particular parts of the mission that we are well suited to and that we can bring our gifts to, and kind of discerning that is a part of spiritual growth. But then just trying to do that faithfully and resisting the lies of the world that tells us that some things are more important than others, that like resisting external status being able to define us is so hard. I'm constantly having to weed that out of my life.
And if I could ask you something else, I mean, I mentioned how extraordinary was to see people so happy, and to see so much love in the church and in fellowship. It also made me recognize that the world could be a better place. And there I had these kind of conflicting thoughts about, what do you call it when you go out there to preach the gospel and spread the word? Is that evangelization, which is always something that I thought was a really, aggressive type of activity, evangelicals going out into Africa and kind of proselytizing and spreading the word and this, that and the other. And now I sit in it, I look at it and I feel quite different about it. I think, well, if everybody felt like this, it would definitely be a far better world. And you kind of, to me, my once revolutionary kind of notions about a revolution, we just turn it all over and subvert capitalism and create this utopia. I mean, that's not going to happen. But this suddenly seems as a kind of a viable alternative. But at the same time, I'm not quite there where I'm suggesting evangelizing with people. In fact, it's already a different thing. Just speaking to people on a one-on-one basis, it's awkward. Speaking to my friends, some of them, my kind of core friends, my atheist friends from the same hard left background as I come from, there's anger, there's resentment, there's a determination to get into an argument with you about it. I mean, where's the evidence for God type of arguments, avoid it. And it's quite difficult how to speak about it. What is very nice is, I had this the other day, a client came to see me, he's a local farmer. I started talking to him about this. And when he kind of got the gist of it, he was so happy. He jumped up and he embraced me. And literally, he said, oh, the hairs on my arms all standing up. He was so genuinely happy and excited about it. It was great. And it's wonderful when you bump into people and they feel like that. They're really, really happy. But on the other hand, I have these friends who want to have an argument with me about it, So I cannot imagine what evangelical work must be like. Negative, hostile, angry responses, perhaps. Anyway, I don't have any ideas about it. I don't know how you do that. I like the idea if more of us felt this way, the world would be a better place. But I'm damned if I know how you do it without attracting, hostility.
If you think yourself back into the man you were before, more like your friends, and one of them had gone through an experience like this and they were trying to explain it to you, what do you think you needed to hear in that moment? What were you afraid of when you saw that deep change in them?
I recognized that people could change, but I think I thought it was something happening in their brains. At university, I read that book which I've heard come up quite a lot as I'm slowly watching Varieties of Religious Experience.
William James.
And that kind of religious experience notion was quite interesting to me, and I've seen how people change. From my perspective, it was always, they've discovered Jesus or something. And I've been quite pejorative about it, But I could recognize that something has clicked in their heads and they've changed. Their drug addiction is gone, their alcoholism is gone, their behaviors have changed. And I recognized that there was something happening, but I assumed it was some kind of psychological switch that was just taking place in their heads. And I discounted any notion of the divine or any kind of spiritual aspect to it. And that is what is different now. I'm drawn to listen to some of your podcast friends and listen to you, and I kind of feel, some spirit pervades the universe. Ian McGilchrist, I'm kind of listening to this kind of thing, and it all just makes sense to me, this notion of the divine. Never mind the here and now and the change, this, that, and the other. I have a different sense about what life is and where it's going and how it's flowing. I'm absolutely confident that, it doesn't end with your dying. I feel part of this divine wind. I use that term just because, it came up during our walk, but I feel part of this greater spirit, this world. I feel it's different, and that I never had before. I thought it was a purely mechanistic thing that can't be explained in your head, but it does. Look, there's clearly something in your head that happens. There's something, your ability to change. What the hell is that? How can you change? How is it possible even to change? It's certainly not a kind of a secular notion of what happens in the head. There's something very deep and profound about it. You look at your life, you feel alive, you see your children, you see the love of people and so on. How can you not believe in something bigger and greater than yourself? It's impossible. I want to say to my friend, listen to the music. Don't you feel the love? With your narrow perception of it, how do you feel love? How do you feel the sense of wonder and mystery that I'm experiencing now? To go a whole lifetime without that, it feels like I was depressed my entire life. And now I'm not depressed.
So it's a hard thing for people to hear, isn't it? When people react like some of your friends are reacting, I think there's various things that are going on. And one is that deep tribal instinct that people like us are who we're safe with, and that when someone that we love and respect changes so profoundly, we can feel betrayed, like they've moved away from us and they're lost to us somehow, and the relationship is under threat. And I wonder if there's ways to speak into that. But also I think, and I find this speaking to my atheist friends, it's really hard not to sound patronizing. It's really hard not to sound like you're saying, but that's actually what I am saying often is, I think there are some things I can see that you can't yet see. And that's sort of what evangelism is. Come and see, come and taste, come and experience it. It's not from me and it's not about me and I'm not better than you, but I do have something I want to point you to. I do have someone I want to introduce you to. And I think there are ways to do it that are relational and gentle and non-arrogant and non-patronizing. But this stuff is I talk about sometimes it's setting off a kind of emotional firestorm, because it's so, I remember in the period that I was trying to be an atheist, I did not want someone to tell me that God loved me or that there was a love of God, because I was like, I can't let myself hope for that, because it is the potential for disappointment is so high. Hope is painful. It feels threatening. So I need to keep my expectations low. I need to keep my understanding of the world mechanical, because the idea of something else, I might get fooled and it might not be there, and then my heart would be broken. And that there's so much going on in someone when something like you happens. How you navigate that as a friend, I think, takes huge skill.
Do you even want to risk that conflict? Do you want them to share it? Do you want to try, or do you just want to leave it alone? I don't want to have an argument with anybody. In fact, one of the big changes, is I don't want to fight with people. I don't wish to fight and have arguments. I don't want that.
And I kind of miss that myself from time to time. I come here waiting to kind of
have a good argument. Yeah. The challenge is you still want to be friends. These are people you care about very deeply. Now you want to maintain this relationship without the conflict. It's also wonderful talking to people who are receptive. Delicious feeling, when you're trying to explain something and that person kind of gets it and gets the feeling and likes what you're saying and responds. It also opens an avenue to different relationships with different people on different kind of levels. I think there's a kind of an intimacy involved in sharing the deep emotions that you feel, the sense of love. And talking about love and sharing love is a very intimate sensation. And you know, intimacy is something absolutely lovely, you know, so feeling this kind of intimacy with other people, which is what I get in these fellowship groups, is absolutely wonderful. So the temptation even to talk to strangers is strong, because, you know, maybe you get this positive reaction. So it's a bit kind of like you put out the story and see how they react. You know, is it like this? Is it like God up, this, that, the other? Or is it kind of coming closer and, oh, you know, you're talking, we recognize something and then building on it. I've made more friends than I've lost. I'm closer to people, to more people than I've ever felt before. So,
how do you love the friends that are scared and hostile better and more loyally and more like Jesus would, even while they're being hostile and spiky? How do you be a better friend to them than you've ever been before? And show them with your actions, not with your words, the change in you?
I think that's probably it. And then to try and live like Jesus did. And he wouldn't reject his friends because they reacted in a negative way towards him. Take some guidance from the church, from the Bible, and try and live that out a bit. But I've still got a lot to learn on that journey.
Don't we all?
I've also had to recalibrate so much because, as you say, a long friendship. I mean, Richard and I have been through some extraordinary things. When he gets arrested and put in the back of a police van and gets taken and locked up and charged for incitement of a crowd, and I have to then drive his car and fetch him and phone his son, and then, you know, he's in court and I'm the only one there to support him and he's arguing the case. But there was at the same time this loving sense that Richard and my relationship was, we loved the same thing. It was justice. And it was so lovely to go for a walk with him. You know, when I got here yesterday morning, going for a long walk in the thing, and I was now able to use language that I would previously censor myself from using because I didn't want to push his buttons and have an argument. Although sometimes I did, but, you know, because I enjoy those arguments. But at the same time, I'd say there's so much more at stake here. It's not just about being right in that, and we're able to then reflect on that passage of Micah. This is what the Lord asks of you, only this: act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God. Now, the interesting thing is, when I first met Richard, it's not that he did not have faith. He had a faith in the law. He was convinced, and I was so intrigued that he was now going to use the law as an instrument of social justice. And I thought, well, isn't that obvious? That's what all lawyers do. No, it's not a universal value amongst lawyers. They use the law to kind of make themselves pots of money. But I saw somebody who was taking a step of faith, and I guess justice is an ephemeral concept in some sense, and if it doesn't have that loving tenderly and walking humbly.
I wanted to say something else when you're talking about people and generally. So South Africa, as you probably know, the socio-economic disparities are huge, and they include, you know, massive material differences in wealth and poverty, but also language and culture. My clients are overwhelmingly poor, rural people. We don't even speak the same language, you know, most of us. And I've been working in those communities, for those communities, my entire professional life. But there was always something that bothered me. They're so religious. They all go to church. They all believe in God. And of course, for me as a Marxist, you know, religion, opiate of the masses, I'm trying to foster a revolution. I'm trying to just get them more militant and fired up so that we can have this revolution and really, really change things. But we're inhibited by these religious, backward, superstitious beliefs that they hold. Yes, I go through this experience, I go to church, and there are my people, my clients, and we're sitting with them in these kind of fellowship things, and they're the same people I always knew. And I see for the first time what religion means to people, how it literally makes your life worth living, notwithstanding the poverty and the hardship. I kind of thought it was to compensate for the poverty and the hardship, you know, to reconcile yourself to it. But no, it's about making life meaningful and making it worth living and loving and sharing and living a full life. Without that, I recognize now, their lives would truly be miserable. And here I sit, relatively prejudiced, not wanting for anything materially and in many other ways. But if you don't have that, having God and faith is fundamental. So there's a bit of a mea culpa there. I've always had this slightly condescending attitude towards it, of which I'm now, in retrospect, slightly ashamed.
Yeah.
I am ashamed that I thought so ill of their faith and their beliefs, thought, you slavish people, subordinating yourselves. And I'm ashamed about how I thought about them in relation to their religious beliefs. I didn't understand. And curiously, just as a last kind of afterthought, now that I share that faith, engaging with people and getting close and personal to people is so much easier.
Have you ever read that Marx quote in its context? It doesn't say what we think it says. It says religion is the sigh of an oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world. Religion is the opiate of the masses.
Well, that's slightly different, isn't it?
Yeah. If you pull that one line out,
yeah,
it sounds like these druggy masses, blank-eyed.
Yes.
I think we need to remember that opium was a painkiller at the time. What he's saying is this is a comfort. This is a place of the heart of a heartless world is the line immediately before it.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? I have been peddled a very dodgy interpretation of this quote.
Well, I could tell you about the historic task of the proletariat. I wasn't all that close on that particular line, but
Richard, I'm really interested in the sort of psilocybin bit of the story and how you think to yourself about what happened there and what it did and what role it played in your story.
If you see Ian McGillichrist, you read his stuff and you read some other stuff around this field and you read about how important, how the world is really constructed by what we are. It's not in fact green and blue and lovely like this. What it is something completely different. And I think that experience where reality seems to melt away and your brain kind of reads and interprets this thing in ways that you've never thought or imagined it could be. I mean, I cannot describe how strange it is. I mean, it is deeply, deeply strange. But everything else about your brain constructing the reality and the reality not being concrete, hard, material, it's that notion that was cracked. I mean, I could read about it objectively, but this is a first-hand experience as your brain quite literally starts looking and seeing the world in different ways, that you see the world isn't just what we think it is. And if you imagine it's just billiard balls banging into each other and all perfectly logical and this is a tree and this is how it is, well, you haven't really understood things properly. There was another thing a little stat that I saw somewhere saying that people who suffer from autism are a lot more likely to be atheists. Now, I'm not a spectrum person, but I did have this kind of social anxiety and kind of stuff which, afraid of crowds and afraid of groups of people and intimacy and things like that. But I think that's also a part of it, there's left brain, right brain kind of Joel that Ian talks about so well, so clearly. Yeah. I think you need that kind of right brain to feel and sense. And I think perhaps the psilocybin did those two things. One, objectively shatter my confidence about everything. And then it also helped me get rid of some of this anxiety, a greater openness and willingness to feel. And I think both those things are important. So I'm sitting in church and I'm feeling love, I'm feeling, support, I'm feeling those things. So perhaps it helped, it shattered the certainty and just made me more open to feeling.
Yeah.
But I want to emphasize, it was not the religious experience. It just facilitated the experience that I've enjoyed the last 6-8 months of coming to a richer, fuller, more meaningful place, and for which I'm so enormously grateful and so happy. It just boggles me. 64 years. What have I missed out on all this time? It's just terrifying. It's terrible. But anyway, I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that stories like yours and others will encourage people to, to explore, to seek. The psychedelics thing is really fascinating me because you are far from the first person that I've met who would credit psychedelics in a very similar way. They just changed the imaginative possibilities. They just changed. It gave them a crisis of faith in materialism, basically, and into that crisis of faith, the possibility of other things came. And it's interesting talking to my, the churches and the Christian communities that I'm in would generally be very nervous of and quite hostile towards drugs of any kind. And I have friends from very many different tribes, a lot of whom would take a wide range of different drugs for different purposes. So I'm it's not something that I have done or feel the need to do, but I'm curious and open. But it's one of the things I've been sort of pondering and praying about, really, because I do see this huge spike in spiritual openness amongst people who have taken psychedelics. And what is happening there is very interesting to me. And it does seem that the McGill-Christ hypothesis about the ways we pay attention, and when we pay attention to things in very left hemispheric ways, in that, that very mechanized systems, closed, abstract, theoretical, parts not wholes way, I think is really key. That is self-reinforcing. Our brains are plastic, that those pathways closes down our range of vision. And that right hemispheric ways of paying attention that are imaginatively attuned, and through ritual, through singing, through meditation, through prayer, through art, through allowing space for our intuition, open up our field of vision to what's possible. And that we sort of somehow need that mode of attention in order to encounter divine love. I was praying about it because I was like, God, why would you allow that to happen? Why would you allow us to build a world in which it's more difficult for us to encounter you? Why would you let, and I haven't come to a conclusion on that, but there's a lot of language in the Bible about people hardening their hearts. The people hardened their hearts against God. And I wonder if that's part of what's happening when we continually reinforce the world is a machine. We are machines. This is all there is. The world is meaningless. That when we tell those stories and over and over and over again, we harden our hearts.
We do. Yeah.
Psilocybin is this weird, I think maybe the safest way to do it is through immersing ourselves in different ways of seeing and being part of congregations or taking part in rituals or meditating or whatever it needs to, increase our right hemispheric ability to pay attention in right hemispheric ways. But it feels like psilocybin actually does this weird, it softens our hearts really quickly, or it changes the ability to pay attention. It's in a way that's a shortcut. Yeah, it can. It can. And I'm like, is that good? Should we do more of it? Is it dangerous? How do we deal with this?
Yeah. But I do think that there are a lot of people who are trapped in this left brain world. They are utterly incapable of changing. They are stuck in this mechanical paradigm. And it is terrible because it has to do with addiction. People stuck in addiction and with other problems, well, addiction being the main one and the worst one. If they could find a way to change, to find God or religion, they could change. They're incapable of changing, and I think they are so resistant to it. They're not through deliberateness, just they're stuck in that mode of thinking. They cannot get out. I had that feeling about being unable to change. I can't change myself. I can't rid myself of my bad habits, you know. I just can't do it. Try as I might, I can't. I know finding faith changes people very profoundly. And then it's an interesting question if something like psilocybin may just make you a little bit more receptive and open to it. I don't know. But what I do know is that the inability to change and to be trapped in this materialist understanding of the world, particularly when it comes along with all kinds of problems and difficulties, entrenched ones, I mean pathological problems, it is tragic that we can't break through and help those people break through to find peace, to change themselves, to find God, to feel liberated and to rescue themselves, you know, from their pain and what they're enduring.
It's been a joy, and I think God's speaking over you, Richard.
No, that's nice. That's lovely.
Honestly, you're going to be an amazing missionary. It's in your heart. Like, your story is powerful, and it will help people because you understand what it's like to live with in a meaningless universe, and as it was.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Any last words, Richard?
For me, this is still such an overwhelmingly personal experience. That's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how it feels. I want to talk about love and fellowship and forgiveness and prayer and how that can change us as individuals.
It's been a huge privilege, and I will be cheering for you. And I'm really glad to have got to know you both a bit, and I hope we can talk again someday.
And I'm going to play a song.
Ipe baba ndipe baba utono